Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome TJK Shares, TJK One-on-One with special guests we bring you from all over the world. We selectively bring you guests who have a story to tell that will inspire you. And the reason I bring them is because they have inspired them. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we encourage you to subscribe, to share, and to post as many questions as you can. I am privileged and blessed and honored to host a person that has been so special in my life and special in so many lives around the world. She's a daughter, and we'll get into how she's a daughter. She's a wife, she's a mother, and she is a grandmother, and also a grandmother not only in the community she lives in, a grandmother for so many, and one who uplifts other grandmothers around the world. Now, earlier, before we started recording, I shared with her that since she's a mother and grandmother, we had a surprise for her. And today, ladies and gentlemen, you get to see that surprise on camera, but you also get to meet them in person. So, ladies and gentlemen, meet Paola. And Paola, please tell us, who is Paola?
First and foremost, I am the mother of your other guest, Scott Sangster, of whom I am very proud, and I'm just delighted that he's here with us today. That was a big surprise. I had no idea he was going to join us. Thank you very much for organizing that. So in addition to being Scott's mom, and we'll talk about some other roles that I play, but I am, among other things, a photographer, a photojournalist, really, and an author. And my 7th book has just been published. All of my books are about women all over the world.
Very good. And photojournalist, photographer. Once upon a time, you and I were having a conversation, and you told me that what got you started was your father buying you a camera at 9 years of age. My daughters are 10. You've met them. At 9, there is no way I would have thought of buying them a camera. How did that happen? How did that inspire you to get to be who you are today?
Well, my father was a radiologist, and so he used photography diagnostically. But for fun, he took pictures of me and of my mother and my brother and our activities. And he thought I might enjoy doing photography as well. But he wanted to teach me as a scientist, it was a very scientific approach to how you should do photography. So it is true that he gave me my first very simple camera when I was 9. And I was not allowed to photograph anything in color. I should give you some context. This was the time before there were cell phone cameras, before there were Instamatic cameras, before there was easily available color film. Color film was very expensive. And all of the photographs that we took, whether color or black and white, had to be processed by the drugstore, and it took a week. And they charged a lot, and they charged a lot more for processing color film. So my father said that until I really learned how to do photography, I couldn't shoot in color. And it took me all the way from age 9 to age 16 to master being sure that the edges of the picture were clear, being sure that the subject was in the middle, being sure that things were in focus, being sure that I had composed it in an interesting way. So finally, I was given a real camera, a Rolleiflex camera that you look down into, as my 16th birthday present, and I was allowed to shoot in color, which was fun.
Wow. It took you from 9 years of age to 16 to master it. So many of our listeners are young people. All they do is grab their phone, boom, and the picture is there, and then they will send it around the world, whether it is TikTok, whether it is Instagram. For somebody now to look at this interview, and that's why I'm doing this, our young people tend to think that the Paolas of the world, the Scots of the world, God just created them and dropped them on the world in this earth, and boom, they are doing what they are doing. And I want them to understand from 9 to 16, you were mastering one skill that you have continued to work on to this day. At one point, we are going to talk about how digital photography has changed from digital, from where it was to digital right now. But the next thing I wanted to ask you was the roles and hats you wear. Introduction, you are a daughter, now we see the influence of your dad giving you a camera and how it led you. The role you've played as a wife, as a mother. Since we have Scott here, talk about these different hats, and maybe our mothers, working mothers or non-working mothers, can also borrow a leaf on how to raise superstars. And then when you are done with that question, Scott can tell us a little bit. He shared something I'm going to ask you after this, you answer this question, about you as a mother and a grandmother. And then he can talk about you as a mother in that role. Different hats you wear and how you change them. All gracefully.
I am a daughter, as you said. My brother and I grew up in Urbana, Illinois, with my doctor father, who later in life invented medical devices, and my mother, who was a housewife, who played classical piano and wrote short stories for fun. So this was a very intelligent and creative household that I grew up in. I'm a wife. As you said, I have been married to David Hill for 35 years as of March 12. We just had a big anniversary.
Happy anniversary. And
thank you.
The next book needs to be how to keep marriages. Since I've gone through 2 divorces, I can learn something. 35 years is a lot of years.
35 years is a lot of years. In fact, David and I were just saying how much we are enjoying looking at a painting that you gave us one time when you were here. It is up on our wall and we look at it and enjoy it every day. So I thank you. Let's see. I am a mother of Scott Sangster, the wonderful Scott Sangster, who is right here. And he is a wonderful photographer too, I should tell you. Scott and I began photographing together when he was very young. And we both had matching Brownie cameras, which we kept hanging from our wrists wherever we went. And Scott actually is a better photographer than I am. That's the truth. And has been a participant in, was a big participant in the newest book, which came out last fall. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that later, but it's called Cool: Women Leaders Reversing Global Warming.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm a grandmother.
We'll talk about it. Yes.
Okay. And I'm a grandmother of Scott's 2 daughters, Alex and Avery. Actually, I gave Alex her first camera when she was about 2 or maybe 3. She was so short that she was photographing everything at her level. So all of her pictures were of dogs' tails and people's shoes.
Wow.
And then Alex, when she was 12, was co-author of one of my books called Wonder Girls, was the story of activist girls ages 10 to 16 all over the world. And her sister Avery, when she was the same age, was co-author of the newest book, Cool: Women Leaders Reversing Global Warming.
Wow. So your dad gave you a camera at 9 years old. You gave a camera to your son at what age?
How old do you think, Scott?
I would say maybe 5. I remember it very young, wandering around LA with snapping away.
Exactly.
At 5 years age, your son gets a camera. Your granddaughters, Alex and Alexi and Avery, who have met in Eastern Park, Cancun, in Just for Kids, an amazing program for children that you two put together. That's when you met Nicholas. Got their cameras at 2 years of age. She was taking pictures. And so for our parents who are listening to us, this is how some of our children are modeled within the family setting. They begin to take something, love it, and might end up being a career, or it might end up being a hobby. But you are also so much inspired that as an author of 7 books, 2 of them, you've authored them with your granddaughters. What an amazing mother and grandmother. Scott, that's what we read. But when I asked you what I can ask your mom, you said you don't know how she does everything she does. She's your inspiration as much as she's an inspiration to the world. Every
Indeed.
time before the birthday of your granddaughters, I learned today that you send packages ahead of time. So by the time they wake up, they are all smiling and happy to celebrate their birthday. Scott, tell us about your lovely mama and let her hear it from you how inspirational she is to you.
Well, on that front, my memories as a kid were lots of celebrations. So every holiday or birthdays there was always a very intentional celebration. And even though we no longer live in the same city, my mom continues that for her granddaughters. And before holidays, routinely 4 or 5 days, there'll be a large box at the front door, and in it will be decorations and candles and cards and streamers and all it's like just add water and it's a celebration kind of kit. And my pantry here is just filled with old collections of past celebrations, and it's very meaningful because she never forgets that these things are important to them, and it may be telling that she doesn't think that I'm a reliable provider of these celebrations, but I'm very grateful that she does this, and I think it means a lot to the connection between granddaughter and grandmother, as they see that she, even though they don't see her every day or get to see her even every week, that their grandmother is thinking of them and is sending love and warmth, and that continues to be an inspiration to me, and I hope will continue.
Wonderful.
Thank you for telling me that. We haven't talked about that, I don't think. I'm glad that is an important thing. Jackson, I'll tell you a story about my grandgirls and me. We have had a grand club ever since they were very young. They call me grandmother and they call their other grandmother grandma. And one day I came after they had been visiting grandma and they kept calling me grandma by mistake and they were just mortified. And I said, it doesn't matter because we are all grands and so are you. And that sounded like a club to them. I think they were ages 5 and 8 or something. And Avery said, I'll make up our pledge. And she said, we are grand, we'll always be grand. Go grands. And Alex, the older one, said she would make up our motto. And she said, "We are grands, will always be grands. Together we'll stand, we'll lend a helping hand." She was rapping.
Oh my
I
goodness.
never can get all the way to the end of her part of the the mottos. She has to say it. But we have had grand meetings ever since they were very small, and we would make paper dolls, and we would make beadwork, and we would have tea parties. We must have had 100 tea parties.
Jackson, I want you to appreciate how special this moment is because of your question. It's the first time I've ever heard the song or the motto.
Is that true?
Because I'm just a son, so they always exclude me from their secret meetings,
True.
which happen at the other end of the house in a room behind a closed door. I've never heard what you've just heard.
I'm going to call this an exclusive interview. Who had just heard the first time what you said about her, and now you just learned. Since you live in Los Angeles, Scott, this is the time now to record that rap. Maybe we can get these rappers out of business by getting grandmas and grand club staging.
Maybe that should be the next book. Is the grand rap.
Grand rap. I would love it. That's a good title. You are not going to rest until you get at least a dozen. So at 7 books now, 5 more, 1 each year, we'll see. But talking about grandma and how you've got here, I didn't send this question to you, but after we were texting and I said something about grandmothers and grandothers, an organization that was started by Joan O'Shea out of Ontario, Canada, a good friend of ours. I cannot forget when we were in Grand Rapids and you gave a talk. After your talk, Joan got on the stage and I got on the stage and we danced for the audience. Joan O'Shea will get to this link and I want to bring my heartfelt sympathies to her and her family for the loss of her husband, Michael, who I met through you, an amazing man. And at the time I met him, their son was working in Uganda. Such a small world connected through the love of grandmas. And you also grew up with another special woman, Mary Sutherland, who I also met before I met you, but we ended up meeting together in Traverse City, Michigan. Talk about these 2 women and the losses they are going through now. And why Michigan? What was the connection of you and Michigan?
My family had a summer cottage about 30 miles away from Traverse City. And my family began going there to the Sleeping Bear Bay. Within the bay where the Sleeping Bear sand dune is one edge. And I met Mary Sutherland in the early 1960s, and she and I became good friends. She had 5 sons and 1 daughter, all of whom were also my friends as they grew up. And I think it may have been one of her sons, Paul,
yes,
who introduced the 2 of us.
Yes, that's true.
So we have not known each other as many years as Mary and I did, but we've known each other for many years. Yeah. Joanne O'Shea was part of the Stephen Lewis Foundation's organization. Nyaka is also one of the members of that organization.
That's true.
Shall I talk a little bit about the Stephen Lewis Foundation, or would you like to do that?
You do talk about it. I had a conversation which is already posted on a YouTube channel with Ilana, who is the co-founding member, and Stephen Lewis is also struggling health-wise. And here to note also that Mary Sutherland, Paul's mom, passed away recently. You informed me and I reached out to Paul. But please do talk about the Stephen Lewis Foundation, and that will tie into why you wrote the book, Grandmother's Book, that benefited so many organizations on the continent of Africa, including Nyaka. all the proceeds from that book ended up with grandmother.
Well, that's just what I was going to say. I'm not sure if you can see grandmother power. It seems to be floating in and out of focus here. Grandmother Power is a book about activist grandmothers all over the world who are making the world a better place for their grandchildren. And 100% of the author royalties from that book go to the Stephen Lewis Foundation. As you know, Jackson, the Stephen Lewis Foundation was founded by Stephen Lewis, a Canadian member of parliament, who was selected by Kofi Annan at the United Nations to be his special representative to Africa to work with the issues of AIDS and malaria and TB.
Yes.
And when he came back to Canada, he was determined that he would spend the rest of his life trying to stop the AIDS epidemic in Africa. And he didn't have lots of money, any special amount of money. So he had the idea that he could mobilize grandmothers across Canada to raise money for grandmothers in Africa. And I featured some of them in the book Grandmother Power.
Yes.
And they were doing all kinds of things to raise money. They were selling ice cream at the beach. They were making quilts and selling them. They were making art and selling it. And over time, they raised lots and lots of money. And the grandmothers in Africa would apply for grants, sometimes for very small amounts, maybe just enough to buy seeds to plant a garden, a community garden, so they could feed their grandchildren. But all of the money from Grandmother Power, my book, goes straight to the Stephen Lewis Foundation to administer in 15 African countries.
The countries have grown beyond 15. It's now like 126.
Whoa. You're right, I have to do other books.
You have to do other books and many more communities. And that's how Nyaka Grandmothers actually got launched, through support from Stephen Lewis Foundation. Ilana and I still look back when we brought grandmothers from the village and they went to Toronto and went to Saskatoon. I've visited grandmothers in British Columbia, on the island of Nanaimo, all the way to grandmothers and grandothers. Some are advocates. Power of grandmothers. But comes back to what Scott said earlier, how you love your grandchildren and want to see the best out of them. My grandmother, who couldn't read and write, loved us so much, Scott, he would keep these small bananas under her bed and pull one grandchild at a time and sneak them in a house and say, you are the special and here is your banana, and walk through the other door and never saw another grandchild. So all 26 grandchildren, we always thought, I am the special one. Until later, we are grown, going, bragging around, you are special one. And the other one said, I thought I was the special one. So the grandmother love goes across the nations, across races, across international borders. And this ties in something else that Scott shared with me, that while you were buying cameras for your granddaughters, you also started taking them on trips earlier on. And what stands out for your amazing, wonderful son, one trip to Mexico when you would teach them how to shake hands with CEOs, how to sit with elderly people in a community and learn culture while on the job with grandmother. Did you know that?
Well, the girls, Alex and Avery, had the idea. Scott and I had been going to this international poverty conference for several years, and you, Jackson, also attended this same conference. And the girls one day said, well, why can't children go to this conference? What is there for kids to do? And we said nothing. And that inspired them to think of a program that they wanted to start at this conference. And Scott told me the story about how they generated ideas for this children's program. They put Post-it notes all over the windows of the car. Am I right, Scott?
Absolutely.
And finally, they decided that they would call this program Just Kids. And in fact, Just Kids began on a small basis with maybe 10 or 15 kids that year. And they ran that program and grew that program over a period of about 8 years. And their idea was that if the kids got to know each other when they were young, that they could then do together world-changing work when they were older, which was a wonderful idea. And really, I would love to be able to look back on that time and those children and see what they learned about each other and about the games they played in Uganda, for example. You came and taught them some dances that they do in Uganda. And you helped us a lot. You were our often guest during that time. And Scott and I were lucky enough to witness them at work.
Okay,
go ahead. Ahead.
I just add to something that you talked about a second ago, which is that was an opportunity for kids to come together from all over Africa and all over Latin America and North America, and that was is pretty unusual still. You know, as easy it is for some to think about getting on a plane and going somewhere. You know, the fact is that most 8-year-olds don't do that, and when they do, they don't spend a full week with other 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds. And so some of those friendships, we actually just talked about this coincidentally last night at dinner with Avery. And some of those friendships continue. And now they continue on Instagram or TikTok, and they follow each other and they DM each other. And she said that she's still in touch with some of those kids.
I didn't know that.
No, I didn't either. Literally, it's just coincidentally last night. But she mentioned it. But it's based in those relationships that formed in that environment. And so I would say that their thesis, you know, now 10 years ago, was a pretty good one, which is that, you know, if we can get together with people as people and kids as kids, then suddenly things like national borders or language differences matter less. And that was really, it's nice to see that continuing, particularly in this day and age.
And you're absolutely right, both of you. And Nicholas attended when he was 12 years old.
Remember well.
And thank you for that opportunity. And Nicholas is still in touch with the kids he met at that conference. One of them.
Oh, good.
They are still, just recently when I was at OC in Dominican Republic, the mother asked me what Nicholas was doing. I said, you should ask your son. They are in touch all the time. They have each other's number. They haven't met in person, but the connections stayed. The following 2 years, Talia, Tessa, and Norton came and attended also. I remember doing, demonstrating to kids how kids in my village carry their water, and we are trying to balance year. They thought it was the most amazing thing.
Everyone enjoyed watching you spill water on yourself, Jackson. That was a lot of fun. I also remember you getting down. Do you remember on your knees wearing a white T-shirt? Yes. And inviting everybody to come sign you.
Exactly.
And all the kids, they started very kind of tentatively, you know, gently signing their name, and then pretty soon they're drawing things on your back and your chest, and it wound up in like everybody hugging you, and it was lots of laughing, and it's the way it should be.
Exactly. And what you started really, the reason that the book I used in that was this one. Secret Goes to School, and when we did the water, we used Marisa Went for Water. And introducing kids at such a young age, they don't have to wait until they are retired CEOs. Like now at Harvard, the program I'm in is to bring people who have spent all their lives but have never done a social impact program or want to scale a social impact program. So thanks to both of you for the dream of bringing our children in the social impact circles with CEOs, impact investors, and change makers. Kennedy Odedi's son, Hillary, was there at one point, the twin girls from Nigeria. For a child who is going to school in the Bay Area or in Michigan to go in this space and meet children from all over the world, before they go to college, they are already informed, and this whole world is now a global village rather than a global dynamic they can't imagine. Going back to the questions we wanted to ask you, Grandma and Mama, you did a lot of work in marketing and communication. These were working for corporations, traveling all over the place. Did you ever imagine you end up in a space of just focusing on women and grandmothers?
No. But I will say, over the time I was doing all of the work that you just described, I was very aware of the issues that affect women. So, for example, in the late 60s and 70s, I was the principal in the first women-led advertising agency in the world, I think. At one point, there were 75 women, and the government told us that we were discriminating and we had to hire men.
That's a new one.
In the 1980s and 90s, I realized that I knew a lot about, excuse me, it's early morning out here. I realized that I knew a lot about women and work issues, and I had the idea that I might write a book about the glass ceiling. But I wanted to put a theoretical framework around my experience. So I went back to Stanford 2 afternoons a week. I took my supposedly 1 month vacation, whoever has time to take a 1 month vacation. I took my 1 month vacation in half-day increments, and on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, I went back to Stanford and I studied all of the women's studies issues that were not available when I was in school. So that meant undergraduate and graduate classes and continuing education classes. I didn't care. I just wanted to know. And that gave me access to the library, so I could do lots of research. And I began developing a matrix in an effort to explain why the glass ceiling existed. And while I was working on that, Mills College, which was a women's college, invited me to teach a program on women in leadership, which I did with a colleague. And then Stanford Institute for Research on Women and Gender heard I was teaching that course at Mills and asked if I would teach that as a summer executive institute at Stanford, which we did 4 times. So over this long period of time, I realized increasingly that women's stories simply were not being told, and that women were doing amazing and important work of all kinds to make the world a better place. So I was determined to try to change that. And as you know, I've now had 7 books published, all about women around the world doing important work to make the world a better place, including grandmother power, including cool
grandmother power. You just answered the next question I was going to ask you, why you focused on women and grandmothers. I had no idea that you had taught at Mills and Stanford and executive courses. You can squeeze in another one and teach an executive course at Harvard University, because they are still struggling with breaking this glass ceiling. You go in business classes, near every other professor is a man. You talk of Fortune 500 companies. Scott works with many of these startup companies, BlackRock and JP Morgan, and you're seeing so many men CEOs, and not just men, but mostly white men. So there's so much work to be done, but you did break many of these ceilings because now publications are all over the place. We have women leaders. Nyaka has 20,000 grandmothers who are
20,000.
20,000.
Woohoo! Bravo.
Book and thanks to the jumpstart of tailoring for girls who live with these grandmothers, they are raising 88,000 children. The project I'm working on at Harvard is now to take this little one area of Uganda we have worked on and replicate it on a national level and other countries. So Congo, Rwanda, Burkina Faso, Malawi, Nigeria, here we come. We'll create a model that will go and help women in those areas. But you mentioned something earlier in your career in advertising agencies. You were a women-owned, women-led advertising agency and no men.
There were not very many men. We did, in fact, add some after we were told that we were discriminating. But maybe there were only 5, 3 or 4 or 5.
So now, go ahead.
Can I add something to that, Jackson? Because as a kid, as a young child after school, my mom was a single working mom. And so I would take the bus from school to the ad agency, which was based here in LA, and spend the afternoons kind of pretending to do homework, but really just wandering around the halls and eating chocolates. And I'll tell you that growing up in an environment that was, I mean, it was what, 95% women. I didn't notice it. It seemed very natural and completely normal to me. And I think it's a good example of how something that to the outside world, like my mom would talk about how unusual it was to have a woman-owned, women-led, women-operated company. And as a kid who grew up in that environment, I thought nothing of it. It wasn't even worth mentioning. But it's how important it is to create these examples, and I think to bring kids in so that we're not changing perspectives, we're establishing expectations. And that was I feel very fortunate to have grown up in that environment, because I never questioned that a woman could be the CEO or a woman could run a project or like that. It just didn't. It doesn't enter my my mind. Except now that I've learned more about the real world. It makes me sad that everybody didn't come from that same starting point.
Yes.
David just finished reading a book called Women in White Coats, and it starts with the story of the first women doctor in the 1850s, I think. If you had told me what Scott just said when I was younger, I would never have believed that women are still fighting for work equality. It would never have come to my mind that this would still be an agenda item.
See, Scott is defining what was normal to him. If you put it in my perspective where I grew up, then it is completely opposite. Because patriarchy, which still we are fighting. In fact, we are fighting this to the extent that now we have many groups. And Scott, I can promise you now, and you just offered yourself, come when we get some more time, we are going to have to do a full interview with you, being raised by such a strong, hands-on, loving, caring mother in an environment that you were raised in, and now you're raising 2 beautiful daughters who had such good training, but also model who's still alive and taking them to conferences and writing books with her. I don't know what they're going to do, whether they will go into early stage investing like dad, or write more books like grandmother, or be lawyers like mother. This is going to be something, but they've been modeled. We who grew up in a patriarchal society, you are growing against the tide. You're fighting against the tide, trying to do something your father never did. To give women an opportunity. That's what led me to do the work I do. But we want also to make sure that we don't take much of your time. You've written 7 books. What's next in the pipeline for you?
Well, the newest book, which I will show you, cool.
Cool. Yes.
Cool.
Can be ordered on Amazon. At the end, we are going to say, make plugin, whatever you want to plug in. We will mention all the books. We'll put the link in the comments, and our editor will make sure that all Amazon links are there so people can order books, but also can read books. Yes.
Thank you. Cool is all about global warming, and it seems to me that the climate crisis is the existential issue of our time. There are many problems in this world, many, many. But the overarching problem, the one that really is threatens our species, not our planet. The planet was going to be all right, but our species is global warming and the climate crisis. So I don't expect to write another book anytime soon, but I do expect to spend time talking about this project. The women whom I interviewed with Avery in 10 countries around the world all made suggestions about what we can do individually to help stop this climate problem. And my hope is to kindle people, inspire people to take action individually. So I plan on spending the next several years encouraging people to do that.
Climate change and global warming is something we can all do. We all have a role to play, and Cool guides us through that. And I'm glad you're going to spend a lot of time doing that. When I was talking to the TJK team, after they looked out your bio, they said, well, Jackson, you don't have to say her age on the recording, but is there a trip to Uganda before her next birthday?
I have no plans to do that, but I sure would love to. I would really love to go and visit Nyaka. I've heard so much about it, and suddenly today I've learned how it's just mushroomed. I salute you, Jackson. That's such important work. I'm so glad that it has expanded and grown. I really congratulate you.
Thank you, thank you. And since you're a trained journalist, I also want to say, is there something I didn't ask you that you would like to talk about? And that goes for you, Scott, and for Mama, Grandma. Then
I think we've covered everything I can imagine talking about. You did such a good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
So nice to see you, and it's terrific to get the update as well. It's been just a pleasure, Jackson, to spend time with you every time I see you, and it's I think you're doing important work on multiple continents, and really thank you for your efforts.
Thank you, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in. Today we promised you a TJK one-on-one, and we ended up, like they say in the USA, buy one, get one free. So we brought you a package of Mama and Son. And Scott, thank you for sharing those tidbits that Grandma didn't even know about. I'm so glad we got to share them on this channel. Please tell Avery and Alex I send my love. They're amazing daughters, and when they watch this, they can sit and appreciate even more of what God has really given you as a family. Thank you for sharing your life. Thank you for writing so many books. And thank you for making this world a better place for sure. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Keep subscribing, keep sharing, and we know the best is yet to come.
Thanks, Mom.
Thank you.